Welcome to the deep dive. Singapore's recent GE2025, well, it delivered a familiar headline, one party with a really significant victory.
Right.
But if you dig a little deeper, there's some pretty interesting currents swirling around, especially when we look at how different groups engaged and what it might all mean for political discussion here going forward.
Absolutely. I mean, the PAP's strong overall mandate, that's clear. 87 out of 97 seats, 65.57% of the vote. That's a key takeaway, no doubt.
Yeah.
But what's really fascinating for a deep dive today, I think, are these signals, quite clear signals actually, pointing towards the growing influence of, well, younger voters. And they seem to have this appetite for, more diverse voices in parliament, a broader range, plus a more robust, open kind of debate on national issues.
Okay.
And we should also look at how the parties tried to connect with them, especially online.
Exactly. So for this deep dive, we've gathered some news analyses on the GE 2025 results, found a really lively discussion thread on Reddit.
Oh, those can be insightful.
Yeah. And articles looking at, the big role social media played, plus the challenges that opposition parties always seem to face.
Right, the perennial issue.
So our mission today is really to unpack these dynamics, younger voters, the online platforms, shaping views, and what these results might signal about the future, the future of politics here, and the kind of debate people seem to want in Parliament.
Sounds good. Where should we start? The big picture.
Yeah, let's start there. The overall election results, maybe just a quick primer for listeners less familiar. You've got SMCs, single-member constituencies, one seat.
And GRCs, group representation constituencies, bigger areas, teams of candidates.
Right. And then there are the NCMPs, non-constituency MPs. Basically, the best performing opposition candidates who didn't quite win a seat but get offered one anyway.
Okay, so the result. PAP's strong showing, we mentioned that. But look closer. The Workers' Party, the WP, they didn't just hit their 10 elected seats. They came incredibly close in Jalan Kayu SMC. What was it? 48.53%.
That's tight.
And Tampines GRC too, 47.37%. Really close. So because of those narrow losses, they'll get offered 2 NCLA seats.
So 12 opposition MPs in total from the WP.
Essentially, yes. But those margins in Jalan Kayu and Tampines makes you think, doesn't it? Just a few more votes.
Yeah, what could have been different? It hints at something specific within that desire for an opposition voice, maybe.
Could be. Now contrast that with the Progress Singapore Party, the PSP.
Right. They had 2 NCMPs before, didn't they?
They did. But this time, no seats won. 0. Which is quite a shift.
So what was their approach, their campaign focus?
Well, the PSP, under Leong Min-wei, really focused on the need for more thorough debate on national policies.
Okay.
They pushed for things like a universal minimum wage, reversing the GST hike, clear policy points.
But it didn't translate into seats.
No. And there might be a few reasons. The redrawing of boundaries in West Coast Jurong West GRC, that was a big one.
How so?
Well, added a lot of voters from areas that usually vote strongly for the POP, diluted their previous strength there, perhaps.
Yeah.
And on top of that, the PSP had a leadership change quite close to the election. That kind of thing can sometimes, affect momentum. Campaign strategy.
Yeah, that's a lot happening right before polling day. And what about other opposition parties? I remember the Reddit thread mentioning mosquito parties.
Yes, that came up in the online chat. It definitely highlighted the uphill battle for the smaller, maybe less established parties.
Like they struggle to gain traction.
Exactly. There was a perception, at least among some in that discussion, that maybe they lacked really strong candidates or a message that cut through. Made it hard for voters to see them as, well, a viable alternative, someone who could actually represent them effectively.
Okay, so pay strong, WP holding ground and nearly gaining, but real challenges for PSP and others. Let's pivot now to the core theme, younger voters and this apparent desire for more voices, more debate.
Yeah, this is really interesting territory. There was a quote in the Times of India from political observer P.N. Balji. He said something like, "Young voters will be a factor. They are prepared to listen to both sides."
Listen to both sides. That feels key.
It really does. And you see hints of it in the WP's results. Okay, they didn't win new seats directly.
Right.
But their vote share went up in Sengkang GRC and Hugong SMC, plus those super close races we mentioned in Jalan Kayu and Tampines. It strongly suggests a chunk of the electorate is actively looking for that opposition presence.
Absolutely. And the Reddit discussion, it was loud on this point.
Oh, so?
People were genuinely disappointed about opposition losses in certain areas. Someone wrote, "West Coast and Jalan Kayu was my biggest disappointment. Clear frustration there.
Right.
But at the same time, huge respect shown for Hugon voters. We know for consistently backing the WP. It's like they admire that commitment to having an alternative voice.
And what's fascinating, too, is that the Reddit chat also touched on this feeling. Like, even with 10 or 12 opposition MPs, is it really enough?
Enough to influence policy,
Yeah, someone commented something like the 10 alternative politicians who are in the parliament are still not enough to stop shit from happening. Their words, not mine.
Wow, direct.
But it underlines that desire for a more substantial opposition, for more effective checks and balances, a wider range of views actually impacting governance.
So there's this appetite for diverse views, but maybe a feeling that the current setup doesn't quite deliver enough impact. What are the hurdles then?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? If the desire is there, why isn't it translating into, say, 20 opposition MPs?
Okay, so how did parties try and reach these younger voters who seem to want this change? Social media feels like, well, everything, right? Especially for Gen Z, where TikTok might be their main news source.
Oh, it's absolutely central. There was a CNA article, Turning Likes into Votes. Great title.
Yeah.
It really hammered home how crucial social media, TikTok, podcasts, you name it, has become for parties trying to connect, particularly with younger people.
Dig you examples.
Yeah, there is this nice little anecdote about a voter, Mrs. Iris Than. She said she prefers watching online videos, reading comments, to learn about politicians. It just shows that massive shift away from, just reading the newspaper or watching the TV news for politics.
And it's not just passive consumption, right? I saw PM Lawrence Huang and others were doing more podcasts, trying to seem more relatable.
Exactly. Podcasts give them that space, don't they? For longer chats, less formal, maybe share a personal story. It breaks down those traditional barriers.
Makes them seem more human.
Precisely.
Right.
The article suggested this fosters a sense of authenticity, approachability, and that resonates, especially if voters are looking for a genuine connection.
And for the opposition, social media must be even more important given resource differences.
Hugely important. For parties that maybe don't have the same level of funding or, established machinery as the ruling party, social media is vital. It helps level the playing field a bit, lets them talk directly to voters without needing the mainstream media gatekeepers.
So, incredibly powerful tool. But there's always a but with social media. Misinformation.
That's the other side of the coin, absolutely. The Straits Times had a piece on misinformation and foreign interference concerns.
Which are always there, especially online.
Right. And in a place like Singapore, super high internet use, everything's got a smartphone. The potential for bad information to spread quickly is significant.
And the government tries to counter this.
Yeah, they've brought in measures like FICA and POFMA to tackle online falsehoods. They even banned deepfakes during the election period.
Which makes sense, but those measures themselves sometimes spark debate, don't they? About free speech online.
They do. It's a constant balancing act, it seems, protecting against manipulation versus enabling open political expression.
Okay, so voters, especially younger ones, are getting their info online, but they also need to be savvy about what they're seeing, which leads us nicely into political literacy, right? And holding representatives accountable.
Exactly. They go hand in hand. If you want more robust debate, more diverse views, you need citizens who can actually engage with those arguments critically.
Evaluate different perspectives.
Precisely. You need the tools to sift through it all.
Okay.
The Reddit discussion actually had an interesting point on this. Someone pushed back against the idea that PAPI voters are stupid.
Okay.
They argued that maybe those voters just prioritize stability or other factors. It highlights that voting choices are complex, lots of different motivations, not just black and white.
And understanding those different perspectives is part of that literacy, I suppose.
Definitely. And accountability. Even where the WP didn't win, those really close results. An educator, Ms. Seedy, mentioned this in the CNA article. She suggested those tight races could be a signal, a message to the PAP that, hey, voters are watching, they're holding incumbents accountable, even if it doesn't flip the seat.
Like putting them on notice.
Kind of. We also saw bits of that accountability demand in the Reddit comments. Younger people worried about things like housing costs.
A perennial concern.
Yeah. And expressing hope that the government doesn't just see the overall win as a reason to, stick with the status quo on everything. They want action on these key issues. They expect responsiveness.
Right. So let's talk about the challenges for the opposition then. Because despite this apparent desire for more voices, they still face significant hurdles. Our sources touched on quite a few.
They did. That Reddit discussion, again, it really highlighted how tough it is for those smaller, newer, quote-unquote, mosquito parties.
Hard to get taken seriously.
It seems that way for some voters. There's maybe a perception they lack their resources, the experience, the polished candidates, the detailed plans, everything you need to be seen as truly effective in Parliament.
And the resource gap is real, right? The CNA article hinted at that.
Implicitly, yes. The PAP just has this huge, well-oiled machine. Online, offline, grassroots networks built over decades. It's very hard for newer or smaller parties to match that reach, that constant engagement.
And the PSP's experience, losing their NCMP seats. Does that say something about candidate recognition?
That PSP leadership change right before the vote. That couldn't have helped with campaign focus or messaging.
Timing is everything sometimes.
It often is in politics. And there's another factor. As opposition parties do get stronger, public scrutiny intensifies, doesn't it?
Higher expectations.
Exactly. People start holding them to a higher standard on their candidates, their policies, their conduct. So they need to be credible, squeaky clean, and offer appealing alternatives. It's a tall order.
Plus, they're always running against incumbents who have the advantage of name recognition, government resources.
All of that. So yeah, even with a segment of younger voters wanting more debate, more diversity, translating that into actual seats gained is still really, really challenging for the opposition.
It sounds like a complex mix of voter desire, structural challenges, and strategic campaigning.
It really is. It takes more than just tapping into a mood. You need to resonate on issues, present a clear vision, and navigate all those practical hurdles, resources, perceptions of viability, keeping engagement going between elections, not just during the campaign fever.
Okay, so wrapping this up, bringing it all together. The GE 2025 results, yeah, strong PP mandate overall.
Undeniably.
But underneath, we see this significant group, particularly younger voters, actively looking for more diverse political voices. And they're living and breathing this stuff online.
Right. Social media, podcasts, they're not just add-ons anymore. They're increasingly central to how political discourse happens, how parties connect, especially with that younger demographic.
And the aha moments for you, looking back at our sources.
For me, it's those really close races. Senkang, Hugong holding firm, Jalan Kayu, Tampines, the near misses. That tells you something. Also, just the sheer volume and kind of intensity of the online conversation around the election. It felt different, maybe, more widespread.
Possibly.
And then, starkly, the very real challenges opposition parties still face, turning that online buzz, that public sentiment, into actual wins at the ballot box. It paints this picture of a political landscape in Singapore that's, well, it's dynamic, it's definitely evolving, lots of interesting possibilities ahead.
So here's a final thought for you, the listener, to chew on. Given how digitally fluent younger generations are, and this clear desire many seem to have for more robust debate, more perspectives, how might Singapore's political scene keep evolving?
Yeah, what's the next phase?
What role will these online platforms really play? Not just in reaching voters, but in shaping political literacy, in facilitating maybe more open talk about sensitive stuff, and ultimately in holding elected officials accountable.
And what do the different results for different opposition parties tell us about the kinds of strategies needed to connect with this changing electorate to really represent what a more engaged citizenry wants?
Lots to think about there. Definitely something to keep in mind as you follow the ongoing discussions and whatever comes next in Singaporean politics. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.